Hello, and welcome to what is kind of that wannabe film class. You might be asking yourself, what does that mean? What does kind of that wannabe film class mean? Well, let me tell you. This is kind of that wannabe film class because you see, sometimes technology, machines, audio software fails us. And this time it failed me. So basically, if you're listening to this and you are a fan of the podcast, you may know that this week was supposed to be our Oscars special. We had a 2-hour-long conversation about it. It was great. Had a good old time. I got into the editing room, pulled up my audio, and was like, this is weirdly short. I know it was recording the entire time. I checked. So the issue was it did record everything I said, but recorded it at 3 times speed. So a 2-hour conversation was condensed into 40 minutes of audio. I tried stretching out. Sounds awful. I sound like a robot. And in case you're wondering what that sounds like, here's a little clip for you. Do-wop, 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 do-wop. It's that wannabe film class. Yeah! Logan, if you're curious, I decided that since we don't have music, I'm just making up songs on a weekly basis now. Yeah, that exists. So basically, unfortunately, we are not able to record a second episode of the podcast. So you're here mostly for me to apologize for that. However, I am going to go over a couple things that we talked about in relation to the Oscars. If you don't want to listen to all of that, I totally understand. We don't have the fun banter of me and Chloe. We don't have Logan to argue and disagree with me. You just have me. So I'm going to tell you the quick things you need to know for next month if you are interested in that. Next month's theme will be rom-coms, as it is Valentine's next month, February 14th. Always is. You probably know that. So we are talking about romantic comedies. I'm super excited. I think romantic comedies are a super underserved genre. And we're kicking it off with Chloe's pick, which is Crazy Rich Asians. I'm really looking forward to recording that. In terms of anything else, I wrote an article about why Brandon Routh should be the Superman in the DC extended universe. That's the DC movie universe. I think it's a really good article. I would love if you checked it out. I'd be honored. That's all I have to give you in terms of basic details going forward, which means if you still want to stick around, if you still want to hear what I think about the Oscars, I'm going to bring in some of what Logan thinks about the Oscars from our conversation. And I'm going to touch on the Chloscars, the Chloe Oscars that are not Oscar categories and are based on an entire decade, because that girl does not watch movies on a regular enough basis, or recent movies on a regular enough basis to have real opinions about, the 2019s. So with all of that said, diving into my feelings about the Oscars feelings about the Oscars, that just means what the Oscars have picked, all those things. We're going to kick it off talking about costume design. The Oscars nominated The Irishman, Jojo Rabbit, Joker, Little Women, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood for costume design. If you're looking at this, you'll see that it is a very period piece based nomination list. I mean, not necessarily in the sense of like, an 1800s, 1900s, or early 1900s period piece, but it's all, older, which is pretty traditional for the Oscars. I think that modern movies aren't given enough respect. I know that the costume design awards, I don't know what they're officially called, gave an award to Knives Out because they have a category specifically for modern costume design. And I think that's cool. I think Knives Out has good costuming. I bought a sweater that mimics Chris Evans in it because Chris Evans looks good in that sweater. I realize that Chris Evans' character is a horrible piece of shit, racist, misogynistic garbage man. But Chris Evans is still Chris Evans, and Chris Evans looks fine in that sweater. Anyway, with that said, I think Midsommar and Us should have been nominated. I think that Joker's a great nomination. Jojo Rabbit, I think kind of is just Nazi uniforms remade. And Little Women's phenomenal. I really hope Little Women and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood are of the nominated options. I hope those two win. I think Midsommar, Us, and Knives Out deserved consideration at the very least. I think Us especially And Midsummer, like how many people wore those flower costumes? Like that was phenomenal. Going forward, best makeup is Bombshell, Joker, Judy, Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, and 1917. 1917 is the one big movie I have not seen. So a bunch of times I'm going to say, oh, I think these movies should have been nominated. And 1917 is nominated for a lot. Probably deserves those nominations. I don't know. I know that Logan has seen it, speaks very highly of it. He wrote a review that gave it a 10 out of 10. So it probably deserves it. For best makeup, though, I will say, even though I've not seen Bombshell, Judy, Maleficent, or 1917, I think Joker did a good job makeup-wise. I think deserves that nomination. But Rocketman isn't nominated, and that's crazy. They made Taron Egerton look like Elton John, and it's weird that that's not nominated. Best animated film is Klaus, I Lost My Body, Missing Link, How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World, and Toy Story 4. I burped for a second there. I have no strong opinions here. Like, those are all the movies I would have nominated. I've not seen I Lost My Body. I've heard great things. I think Klaus is phenomenal. So, bearing in mind I've not seen I Lost My Body, Klaus is easily my front runner for best animated film. It's also in my top 5 movies of the year. So that's, high praise on my part. Best cinematography. Best cinematography is a big one. Best cinematography, me and Logan talked about a lot. We both are not pleased with the cinematography nominations. Those are The Irishman, Joker, The Lighthouse, 1917, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. The thing with cinematography is, I'm going to go on a rant. The thing with cinematography is that our view of film craft, especially in regards to cinematography, is very shaped by how male film has been for a long time. And I think we see that in the cinematography nominations in multiple ways. One, the cinematography nominations are very male in the sense of just like they value more aggressive styles. I read a really interesting article from Film Crit Hulk that talks about how Roger Deakins is this like beloved filmmaker. Not to say he isn't a great filmmaker, but when people point to the reasons he's great, they point to these like big, beautiful, sweeping shots. And they don't point to things like Lady Bird for being fantastic for cinematography, because Lady Bird has a more naturalistic look, but pulling off a natural look that you don't notice is almost harder than pulling off a big, beautiful, sweeping cinematography shot, because that a lot of the times just comes down to how much money do you have. Now, I'm not a cinematographer. I'm not an expert in what is and is not easy to do, but I think that's an interesting perspective. And I definitely think that we are very driven by nostalgia and like the traditional Hollywood imagery in terms of these kind of things. And you can see it in best cinematography. The Irishman is nominated, and that is shot very much like a classic Scorsese. It feels like a 70s, 80s movie beyond the fact that it's set there. Joker is the same thing. Shot in the set in the early 80s, feels like a 70s, 80s movie in terms of cinematography. The Lighthouse, it's a 4:3 black and white movie. Is that cinematography amazing? Yes, I love it. Is it very like playing on the classic Hollywood nostalgia? Also, yes. 1917 is a war movie. That's always going to be nostalgic for film reviewers, critics, whatever. And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I would say, is the most unique. But again, it's imagery of, like, most unique in comparison to the setting it has, but it is still the 70s and it feels like the 70s. So with all that said, the movies that I would nominate, again, haven't seen 1917. Roger Deakins is phenomenal. I'm sure it deserves a nomination, but I think The Lighthouse is a great nomination. I think Midsummer absolutely deserves it. Midsummer doesn't just have beautiful cinematography. It has beautiful cinematography that uses its cinematography to elicit a contrasting feeling in comparison to the story it's telling. You know, it's beautiful. It's daytime. It's this comfortable world that you're supposed to not be disturbed by. And that's the way we interpret the day. And it uses that to scare you. Now, do I like Midsummer? No. Do I think its visuals are beautiful and really effective at what they're setting out to do? Yes. Parasite is another nomination that I think totally deserves it. Parasite uses its visuals to build anxiety. This is going to be a running theme for me. I think that horror movies tend to have some of the strongest visuals, because I think that horror movies, more than most film mediums, necessitate all of film to be used. So if you look at like comedies, right? Referencing another thing that I've watched, read, yada, yada, yada. There's a every frame a painting video about how Edgar Wright uses visual comedy. And a lot of comedies nowadays don't use visual comedy. They use improv style comedy. It's a lot of just talking. And I think that the power of Edgar Wright using that visual comedy is he's pushing film to its limit. He's using film in ways that only film can be used. And people talk a lot about classic Hollywood, like silent films, and think of those sometimes as like the height of filmmaking, because, which I don't agree with, but they talk about it as the height of filmmaking because it requires you to use those visuals. Mad Max Fury Road is cited because you don't really need to hear the dialogue to understand what's going on. It's a visually driven movie. Film is a visual medium. And I think that horror really pushes that idea too. Horror requires visuals, music. It requires all of these very film elements to make it work effectively. And I think you see that in Parasite, which I realize is more of a thriller than a horror, but same difference. The line is thin there. So I think you see that in Parasite. You see that in Midsommar. I think if we look back, like, I think Halloween has some of the best cinematography of most movies I've seen, because it's not just that it's not about it being beautiful. Like, yeah, the shots are nice, but it's about those shots being so effective at conveying the fear. Like, if you haven't seen Halloween, not much happens in Halloween, but the shots are framed in such a way and the editing is paced in such a way that it's just unsettling all the time, and it's fantastic. That was my horror rant. Last Black Man in San Francisco I also think is gorgeous and deserves a nomination, and Little Women is amazing. It's so pretty. I know I referenced Greta Gerwig with Lady Bird when talking about the Film Crit Hulk article, but I really do think that it's amazing and deserves a nomination. Also, Logan mentioned this in our Lost discussion, but The Farewell also has fantastic cinematography, really unique. I enjoy it a lot. And The Farewell is definitely a movie that got snubbed in a lot of categories this year. Also, Last Black Man in San Francisco got no nominations, and that's bullshit because Last Black Man in San Francisco is the second best movie of the year, but that's irrelevant. Whew. So, best adapted screenplay. Best adapted screenplay nominations are The Irishman, Jojo Rabbit, Joker, Little Women, and The Two Popes. A thing that Logan wanted to harp on when we talked was that Joker, yes, it's adapted, but it's weird to call it adapted because, like, it's really only an adaptation in the sense of characters being based on characters, but, like, the story isn't really one that's been told before. The world doesn't feel that much like Batman's world, aside from the Waynes existing and Joker calling himself Joker. So it is an adapted screenplay officially, but, like, that is a weird, wonky thing. You know, the lines between some categories can be weird at times. Same way that lines between genres can be weird at times. I agree with most of this list. I wouldn't put Joker there because it's bad, but especially narratively. But the nominations for Jojo Rabbit, Little Women, and The Two Popes, I think, are all deserved. I would knock off The Irishman. I get it. It's Scorsese. It's a long, like, criminal movie. It feels very classic Hollywood, but I don't think it's very good. I think it's fine. People can disagree with that, and that's entirely okay. I don't really think that it's like an atrocity that it's on this list the way I think that Joker does not deserve to be. But personally, I would nominate... Absolutely, I would put The Farewell in. I think that Joker does not deserve to be there. The Farewell does. It was a movie written in Mandarin primarily by a writer who, if I remember correctly, does not know Mandarin writing. She speaks Mandarin because, like, the movie The Farewell is based on her life. And while I cannot say I have exact details on how much of it is based on her life, I am pretty sure she came here from China when she was young, the same way that Billy and the character in The Farewell did. So she speaks Mandarin, does not know how to read and write it. So she had to write this movie in English, translate it through a program, then read those translations off to her mom, who does know how to read and write Mandarin, and have her mom point out the flaws, explain it to her in the Mandarin language that she does understand verbally, and then fix it. That's wild. And I realize that, like, technical difficulty is not entirely a basis for nomination, but The Farewell is also a very good script, just as a story. So deserves a nomination. Moving on. Best Original Screenplay. Best Original Screenplay nominations are Knives Out by Rian Johnson. My boy, my man, bless up. Marriage Story by Noah Baumbach. 1917 by Sam Mendes, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood by Quentin Tarantino. I don't know why I started saying names this time, but here we are. And Parasite by Bong Joon-ho. I think that a lot of these are good nominations. Obviously, as I've emphasized many times, have not seen 1917. Knives Out deserves to be up here, though. Marriage Story, I think, deserves to be up here. That movie made me cry in a way I did not know I could from watching a movie, because I'm a child of divorce. Parasite, I think, totally deserves to be up here. And my two that I would knock off, again, obviously haven't seen 1917, but for the sake of this, I'm knocking it off. And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I definitely don't think deserves to be up here. It's not a bad movie. I enjoy it. But this is a very, very strong year for films. And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood just doesn't compare to what else is out there. So again, emphasizing Last Black Man in San Francisco is one of the best movies of this year. I know people don't agree with me on that, but they're wrong. It's phenomenal. It's gorgeous. It is such a brilliant exploration of how we attach our identity to things and places and ownership. And oh my God, it's good. So yeah, Last Black Man in San Francisco should have been nominated. Klaus, I think, also should have been nominated. But I can understand that if I watch 1917, I might think that Klaus is the one to knock off. Well, maybe Marriage Story. No. I'd knock off Klaus if 1917 moved onto the list. Moving beyond this, we have acting. The old fake identity thing. Yeah, you tried something, Ben, and you failed. Like a punk. So, supporting actor nominations are Tom Hanks, Anthony Hopkins, Al Pacino, Joe Pesci, and Brad Pitt. Now, here's my hot take. Here's my big thing. I don't think Tom Hanks did a good job as Mr. Rogers in A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. I know a lot of people disagree with me on that, but I think that the whole point of A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood is to humanize Mr. Rogers. Not to say like, oh, he is not this kind of being of kindness. He still is, but it's trying to toe this line between, yeah, Mr. Rogers is actually that good of a person, and also, but he's still human and there's still problems. And I mean, it also has a main story of not Mr. Rogers, and it's all great. But in terms of Tom Hanks' performance, that is a big part of it. And I think that Tom Hanks did not give a performance that felt human. He gave a performance that felt artificial. It felt angelic. And I think that hurt the messaging that it was trying to go for in the movie. And that really stood out to me when I got to the end of the movie and they show a clip of the actual Mr. Rogers talking. And in that moment, when I heard him speaking, I was like, no, that's like a human Mr. Rogers voice. That's how a person who happens to be good speaks. And we didn't get that. So yeah, not a huge fan of that. Moving on from him, though, I also think Brad Pitt did a phenomenal job in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I think that he totally deserves the nomination. He made that movie. I think that Joe Pesci did a great job in The Irishman. I think he deserves to be on this list. I will knock off Al Pacino and Anthony Hopkins. I understand an argument for both of them, especially Pacino, but I'm not putting them on my list because I think there's some deeply underserved performances. First of all, Kang Ho Song, which is a name I'm probably butchering, who is the dad of the poor, the protagonist's father in Parasite. He did a phenomenal job. I loved his performance, and he totally deserves to be on the supporting actor nominations list. I'm surprised he's not. And I'd like to bring in a comment from Logan at this point, which I'm going to bring up constantly. Parasite slaps. Parasite is one of Logan's favorite movies of all time, he says. And he really just wants me to emphasize how good Parasite is. And also just how good all the performances in that movie are. Like, you could put any of the cast of Parasite into any of the acting categories nominations, and they deserve to be there. Am I doing that? No. Could I? Yeah. Also, Willem Dafoe for The Lighthouse. Willem Dafoe was great in The Lighthouse. Deserves a nomination. And Jonathan Majors for Last Black Man in San Francisco. He plays the best friend. I think he did a great job. I think he's a very important emotional counterweight to the protagonist of Last Black Man in San Francisco. I think he deserves a nomination. That was a great movie. You may have noticed me mentioning that already. Supporting actress, we have Kathy Bates for Richard Jewell. Have not seen that. Laura Dern for Marriage Story. Have seen that. Scarlett Johansson for Jojo Rabbit. Have seen that. Florence Pugh for Little Women, or Florence Pugh, as I like to call her. That's a term of comedy and not me trying to make fun of her. I love her. Florence, call me. and Margot Robbie for Bombshell. Also have not seen that. I really don't want to, though. That's also a takeaway from the conversation Logan and I had. I know I keep referencing Logan because Chloe was kind of in her quarter until we talked about Chloscars. So I have no interest in seeing Bombshell. Neither does Logan. Our conclusion is, fuck Bombshell. Not because women's rights don't matter, but because it's framing a story of empowerment through the lens of white Fox News hosts. And it's not to say that like their struggles were not were legitimate. They were. However, when you talk about intersectionality, you can't just ignore other forms of discrimination to prop up these white women who also perpetrated other forms of discrimination. Sexism does not exist in a bubble away from racism and away from homophobia and all of these things. So I realize I've not seen Bombshell, but I have heard this take from people who have seen it. So I feel like that's probably a legitimate position on the movie. And also it just kind of seems like a movie that's trying to play off of a big news story without really being enough time since that event happened to have a strong perspective on it, aside from just, hey, this happened. So yeah, not a fan of that movie's existence. Who would I nominate for supporting actress, though, you ask? Well, I'm glad you did. Florence Pugh for Little Women absolutely deserves it. And frankly, like, I know I haven't been calling winners in categories up until now, but I would give it to her because I love her and I love her performance as Amy. Amy, I know you don't exist, but call me. J-Lo for Hustlers also deserves a nomination. I think she did a phenomenal job. Scarlett Johansson for Jojo Rabbit. Am I a Scarlett Johansson fan? No. Did she do a good job? Yeah, it was quite good. It kind of made me sad that she's not a great person. And also Laura Dern for Marriage Story, I think was a good performance. Totally valid to put her in here. And Lee Jung-eun for Parasite. Now, when I was talking to Logan, he mentioned that he thought a lot of supporting actress performances in Parasite were totally deserving of supporting actress nominations. And I agree with him. Both moms were fantastic. The sister was fantastic. All amazing. However, I'm not nominating any of them. I am nominating Lee Jung-eun, who plays the housekeeper, the original housekeeper, who I think is the best supporting actress performance of the Parasite cast, though, again, they were all amazing. So those are my nominations for supporting actress. Florence Pugh is my vote for winner, but I respect disagreements. Actor. Logan and I had both not seen Pain and Glory, but Antonio Banderas probably did a great job. He was nominated. Leonardo DiCaprio was nominated for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Adam Driver for Marriage Story. Joaquin Phoenix for Joker. And Jonathan Pryce for The Two Popes. Logan's more of a fan of Jonathan Pryce's performance for The Two Popes than I am. I think it's good. I enjoy it. I don't think it's someone I would nominate in comparison to some of the other performances. Obviously, have not seen Antonio Banderas. So who would I nominate, you ask? I'm glad you have come to me with this question. You see, first of all, Choi Woo-shik, the lead of Parasite, did a phenomenal job. Logan and I both agree. Nominate this man. My personal pick for Best Actor, Robert Pattinson for The Lighthouse. I know Willem Dafoe had the big bombastic performance, but frankly, I think Robert Pattinson's more reserved performance is the best part of The Lighthouse. That movie is fantastic, and his performance is definitely a standout in it. Adam Driver for Marriage Story. Also, yeah, I would agree. And Jimmy Fails for The Last Black Man in San Francisco, the lead. I think he did a great job. I've already referenced him. And of course, the biggest snub, like not in terms of the one I disagree with the most not being on here. Robert Pattinson is the biggest in terms of not agreeing with it, but Lighthouse is a horror movie, so I'm not really surprised. The performance that I think is the biggest surprise for me in terms of like, wow, I would have expected them to nominate him, is Taron Egerton for Rocket Man. After Rami Malek won Best Actor for his performance in Bohemian Rhapsody, I'm shocked that Taron Egerton didn't get nominated for Rocket Man. Also, because I think he did a better job than Rami Malek. No offense to Rami Malek. I just think Taron Egerton's ability to become Elton John was stellar. So I think that's a big miss. Now, Logan and I had a disagreement when talking about this because Logan brought up that he thinks Leonardo DiCaprio did a better job than we give him credit for. You may have noticed Leonardo DiCaprio is one of the names I knocked off of my list. I'm talking very fast right now. It's whatever. So Logan thinks that Leonardo DiCaprio did one of the best acting performances of recent memory of his career with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He really stood up for him. He really fought for him. And you know what? Logan convinced me. I think Leonardo DiCaprio deserves to be a Best Actor nominee. And I'm going to take off Adam Driver from my list and put Leonardo DiCaprio on. You may have noticed that Joaquin Phoenix is not on my list for Joker because his performance was fine. It was fine. I know he's probably going to win, but do I think he deserves it? No. No, I do not. And I will again emphasize that I have nominated other movies I don't like, Midsommar, for categories. So me saying Joker doesn't deserve it isn't just because I don't think Joker's a good movie. It's because I don't think these specific qualities are up to the level of the competition, which is fine. It does, like, Joaquin Phoenix is a great actor. Just because his performance didn't break me in the ways that other performances have broken me does not mean that it isn't a good performance. It just means, not every role is going to give you that, you feel it. You get me. You're picking up what I'm putting down. Best Actress. So the nominees for Best Actress are Cynthia Erivo for Harriet. Might have butchered her name. I apologize. Scarlett Johansson again for Marriage Story. Saoirse Ronan for Little Women. Charlize Theron for Bombshell. And Renee Zellweger for Judy. I have not seen 3 of these movies, Bombshell, Judy, and Harriet. I've heard fantastic things about Renee Zellweger as Judy, so I'm sure she probably deserves this nomination. But for the sake of me just nominating who I feel should be there based on what I have seen, I can't speak to it. So who do I think should stay? Saoirse Ronan definitely should stay. That's it. That's the end of who I think should stay. In terms of who I would add, I would nominate Lupita Nyong'o for Us. I would nominate Awkwafina for The Farewell. I would nominate Florence Pugh for Midsommar. And I would nominate Ana de Armas for Knives Out. They might be thinking, Ana de Armas, really? For Knives Out? Like, I know you're in love with her, but come on. Hear me out. Ana de Armas led a movie that she was not presented as being the lead for. People went into Knives Out thinking it was going to be this kind of ensemble movie about the family, and maybe Daniel Craig's detective was kind of the lead who was driving it, but it really seemed like it was an ensemble piece. And don't get me wrong, the ensemble of this movie is phenomenal. We'll talk about that soon. But this movie really ended up becoming Ana de Armas's movie. She is the protagonist. The movie spends a lot of time on her. It goes way more into like her emotional reaction and coping with the events of this film than I expected. I expected like a fun romp of a movie with murder, and it really became this much deeper criticism and analyzation of society through the lens of Ana de Armas, this girl who has to deal with this wealthy family, a world that she's not from, and the death of the man that she took care of and was friends with. And I think she did a great performance. I think she carried a movie that she was not presented as being the one to carry, and that's phenomenal. So I think she deserves a nomination. Now, you might have heard me say, we're going to talk about ensembles. Best Ensemble is not nominated, or is not a category in the Oscars, but I think it should be. Now, Best Ensemble is a category in the SAG Awards. I was talking to Logan about this, and Logan pointed out, hey, Best Ensemble's a category in the SAG Awards, but that's because the SAG Awards don't have a Best Picture category. And he's right, that is fair. However, I still think that Best Ensemble is a valid category to have. At the very least, if you don't have a Best Ensemble, I think you should have a Best Casting Award, because I think some movies really do work off of the strength of their overall cast. And I think sometimes a cast is just so good that it's hard to pull out a single performance. So this is like with Parasite. Parasite did not get nominated for any Best Acting awards at the Oscars officially, unless my nominations suddenly become law, which would be amazing, but not likely. But Parasite did win the Best Ensemble Performance Award at the SAG Awards. So clearly Parasite has amazing performances. As someone who's watched Parasite has amazing performances. So I think there needs to be something to honor these movies that are so strong in terms of their cast that sometimes performances get lost in the weeds of it. And also, I think casting directors deserve the recognition, because casting's a very important and very hard job. So my nominations for Best Ensemble, with that said, is Knives Out, Parasite, The Irishman, Little Women, and Ready or Not. Logan, I apologize for the fact that you were not here to argue with me more about why you don't think Best Ensemble should be a category. We should have that argument sometime again on the podcast, because I think that's an interesting argument. I'm not saying that I'm like definitively right, but I'm at least going to say the ensembles that I think are amazing. Like Little Women's ensemble, Knives Out's ensemble, and Parasite's ensemble are amazing. Like they're stellar. I'm shook. This finally brings us to some of the heavy hitters. Well, we've already had some heavy hitters, but what I'm going to call some heavy hitters. We have directing. Nominees for directing are they exist. Martin Scorsese for The Irishman, Todd Phillips for Joker, Sam Mendes for 1917, Quentin Tarantino for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and Bong Joon-ho for Parasite. So what I'm saying is, we get it, Academy. You have a boner for the 70s/80s, but you're wrong. That's bad. So Martin Scorsese, I think, is phenomenal. I love him as a director. I don't love all his movies, but I just I like what he's going for, and I also just think he's great as a person in the world of film. I think he's done a lot of really important things for cinema, not to use his term, but I'm using it anyway. But with that being said, I don't think that The Irishman is that interesting of a movie from him. I think it feels a lot like old school Scorsese. And it's just like, I've seen that. You've done that. And there's an argument to be had about like, at what point does comparing the quality of someone's work to those against it contrast with comparing the quality of someone's work to their own work. So if this was a movie made by someone that wasn't Martin Scorsese, would I be holding it to a higher esteem? And maybe I would. I don't know. I don't think I would hold The Irishman as a actual movie up higher, but I might hold it up higher in terms of like the quality of directing. But the problem is, I know Martin Scorsese can do that. I'm not seeing anything new. And when you're doing the same thing you've been doing, even if it is something amazing, I just don't think that is necessarily deserving of nomination for directing unless the competition just isn't that strong. And the reality is the competition is incredibly strong this year. So this goes for Quentin Tarantino. This goes for Martin Scorsese. And this doesn't go for Todd Phillips because Todd Phillips does not deserve it because it's a bad movie. So with that said, what is my nominations for top 5 directors of the year? First of all, Bong Joon-ho obviously should still be in this list because Parasite's phenomenal. Robert Eggers for The Lighthouse. They built a lighthouse on an island with a box of scraps. It deserves the nomination. Lulu Wang for The Farewell. Again, I already talked about how she wrote this script and she does not read and write Mandarin. She also shot this script in Mandarin. And I realize what you're thinking, but Ben, you said she speaks Mandarin. I did say that, but it's still like she grew up most of her life in America. She's been in America for a long time. I can't imagine it's easy to have to do something as hard as directing while using the language you're less accustomed to speaking in your day-to-day life. Some of this is conjecture, I realize, but it's also just a really well-directed movie. It's unique and weird and beautiful and gorgeous, and its ability to be like uncomfortably funny without making me cringe is amazing because I usually can't watch awkward humor. But Lulu Wang toes that line brilliantly. Next up, Greta Gerwig for Little Women. She did a great job. I think Little Women's phenomenal. I think Greta Gerwig is a amazing character or an amazing actor's director, which I think is one of the best types of directors. I think it's one of the hardest types of directors to be. And that really just stands out to me. She's able to bring a tone and a life to her world and to her characters through her direction that a lot of directors aren't able to do. Finally, I nominate Mariel Heller for A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. I don't love A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. I think it's good, but I think her directing is fantastic. This is a big point of contention Logan and I had because I love the way A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood is structured so that it's essentially a Mr. Rogers episode. It opens with Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers arriving in his house, the way a Mr. Rogers episode opens. It has transitional shots that use the Mr. Rogers set kind of thing, but it's New York City and other places. And I think that it's phenomenal. It's brilliant. Logan doesn't like it. I haven't put a ton of thought into trying to like understand that, but that's fair. You know, it doesn't have to work for everyone. But for me, I think that was brilliant. I think the direction of this movie is its strongest element. So I would nominate Mariel Heller as the director of A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. You will notice that the nominees for directing are 4 white men and 1 non-white man. The nominees for actress are 4 white women and 1 non-white woman. The nominees for actor are 4 white men and 1 non-white man. Nominees for supporting actress and supporting actor are all white men. A lot of white. A lot of men in the categories where like directing, it's all men. And that's dumb because I think this is a phenomenal year for women as directors. So I really think that the lack of nomination for Lulu Wang and Greta Gerwig especially is ridiculous. And that makes me sad. So, it's the Oscars can always improve. And I realize that it's a process, but this was an amazing year for movies, and an amazing year for movies that are unique and from voices we don't always see. And I really hope that the trend going forward is seeing more movies from voices we don't as often get. However, nominations matter. When you're nominated for something, you are propelled into an echelon that you wouldn't necessarily be in. We've seen it with like Jennifer Lawrence. She got nominated for Winter's Bone and suddenly she was Jennifer Lawrence. She got Hunger Games and she got all these things and she was a big deal suddenly. And I don't know why that was my reference point, but it is. And the fact that we've nominated a bunch of people who, and I'm not saying like, oh, just nominate newbies so that they get respect, even if they aren't necessarily the best ones. I don't think Martin Scorsese deserves a nomination. I don't think Quentin Tarantino deserves a nomination. I definitely don't think Todd Phillips deserves a nomination for director, is what I'm focusing on right now. But just overall, I think the fact that we have all these unique new voices and we aren't really like giving them the respect that I think they deserve is dumb. And that makes me sad. So I hope we still see really cool, unique stories. I realize the Oscars aren't everything. A lot of these movies made money, which was cool. But nominating them for Oscars, giving them Oscars awarded would only push that further, and it sucks that it's not. That's the end of my little rant there, though. You're probably wondering, Ben, what about Best Picture? That old thing. Well, there's 9 movies nominated for Best Picture. The Academy can nominate up to 10. They don't have to nominate 10, though, and they nominated 9. Their 9 nominations are Ford versus Ferrari. Have not seen it. The Irishman, Jojo Rabbit, Joker, Little Women, Marriage Story, 1917. Also have not seen it. You know that. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and Parasite. As I've emphasized, I have seen 7 of these 9 movies. And I like this list better than I thought I would. But I think part of that is because it's a list of 9, which means there's a lot more room for the Academy to put in movies. I feel like if I actually organized this list in terms of like what the Academy thinks are the movies most deserving of nominations, they'd probably have, the movies that we've seen getting awarded for directing and stuff. So we'd probably see The Irishman, 1917, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Joker, and Parasite. And obviously I love Parasite. I think Parasite's phenomenal. But I think that is the wrong movies to put at the top. And I realize that's conjecture, but I'm going to do it anyway. So what would I choose? Well, I think Parasite absolutely deserves to be there. It's one of the best movies of this year. I think that Marriage Story and Little Women also deserve a place on this list, and Jojo Rabbit. What do I think's missing? You're not going to be surprised. Knives Out, definitely. It's my favorite movie of the year. I'm not saying it's the best movie, but it's my favorite. Last Black Man in San Francisco, also. I've emphasized that a lot. Klaus, I think Klaus is one of the best movies of this year. I would nominate it. I know. Animated movie nominated for Best Picture? Unheard of. We're changing things up, man. Also, Booksmart, I think is phenomenal. I know it's a comedy. Comedy's not going to get nominated. It's lower on my list, so like I don't care as much that it's not, but I think Booksmart's fantastic. The Farewell, obviously, I've talked about that. Logan talked about that in our last episode. He thinks The Farewell is amazing. I think The Farewell is amazing. And The Lighthouse. I really like The Lighthouse. I think it's a great movie. I think it does really weird, fun, cool things. And I cannot wait to own it so I can watch it a million times on my giant TV. You might be asking yourself, Ben, what would you nominate? What would you choose as Best Picture of this year? Obviously, I just said Knives Out is my favorite, but realistically, if I had to choose, it's probably not going to be Knives Out because I just think that there are movies that kind of on an overall level impress me a bit more. And I'm kind of torn between 2. I'm torn between 3, I guess, but I'm torn between Last Black Man in San Francisco, Little Women, and Parasite. And I really can't decide. I'd be happy with any of them. But if we're talking the movies that are actually nominated, I'm going to say if Parasite or Little Women win, I'm going to be very happy regardless. If anything else wins, I'm going to be sad. I'm going to be real sad. It's going to be sad boy hours. And I hope someone will deal with me, but they probably won't because I'll probably be annoying. So that's going through all the Oscars. Before I leave you, thank you so much for joining this little me talking at nothing session. I'm sorry that we lost the real episode, the real conversation, the back and forth, the dumb Chloe jokes. I know I don't have her comedy skills, especially when it's just me. But, I'm having fun here. I'm having a good old time. So I'm going to leave you with the Chloscars. The Chloscars are 6 categories, I think. We'll find out. Chloe's nominations for Villain of the Decade, that's best villains, not sexiest, we'll get to that, are Killmonger, Megamind, and Oscar Isaac in Ex Machina. Ben, you might be thinking to yourself, Ben, where's Loki? Where's all these other things that Chloe loves? Where's General Grievous? Well, first of all, we said the decade. We said the decade. Have you seen General Grievous in the past decade? No. Well, not on movies. You've seen him on TV, maybe. But not in movies. And this is where we're talking about movies. This is a movie conversation. This is that wannabe film class. Maybe you heard. So those are her nominations. If she had to pick a top, she would have picked Megamind, which is wild to me. Because I know he's a supervillain, but also he's the hero at the end. Okay, Chloe, whatever you say. She can't argue with me now, so I'm just here with all the power. Sexiest villain, we have 4 nominees. Mysterio, because, of course, performed specifically by Jake Gyllenhaal. John Hamm in Baby Driver. Kylo Ren, but with the helmet on only. Kinky. And Loki. That's not a surprise. I don't really have an opinion on these. I think, they're all hot. They're all sexy men. They're all good-looking dudes. I'm surprised Killmonger isn't on this list, and I'm surprised Oscar Isaac and Ex Machina isn't also on this list. Those are also both very sexy dudes. But, we're learning something about Chloe's type. I don't know what that something is, especially with Kylo Ren specifically in a mask being on here. But we're learning. That brings us to coolest fight. Chloe has 4 nominees here as well. Pacific Rim. Specifically the fight at the end when the Jaeger is being pulled up into space. And it whips out its sword and slices right through the kaiju. It's dope. Pacific Rim's a great movie, guys. We need to talk about that at some point because, oh my God, yes. I love that. I know it's like the most mainstream action-y blockbuster-y Guillermo del Toro movie, but it's probably also my favorite Guillermo del Toro movie. So, yeah, that's something. Next up, we have Godzilla, King of the Monsters, which I disagree with heavily, but Chloe thinks, she didn't specifically mention a specific fight. She seems to think they're all amazing, and Logan agreed with her. Godzilla, King of the Monsters was the winner of these, but we also had the final fight in Spider-Verse and the fight in Tron Legacy, the first fight against Rinsler. Now, like I said, Godzilla, King of the Monsters won. I don't agree. I think Godzilla, King of the Monsters fights were all boring. I think that movie was boring, but I was outvoted, so here we are. Best Robot. We have 5 nominations. We have Bumblebee, who Chloe has designated as her son. We have Ava from Ex Machina. We have Optimus Prime, who Chloe has designated as her dad. Does that make Bumblebee Optimus's grandson? Things to think about. We have BB-8 and we have K2SO because she watches Star Wars like a fucking nerd. We came to the conclusion that BB-8 or K2SO are probably the best. Personally, my vote is for Ava, though. I am biased. You may know why if you've listened to this podcast. Moving on. Biggest waste of a robot. Chappie, because that movie was apparently bad. Have not seen it. Can't speak to it. BB-8, because BB-8's fantastic in the first movie, episode 7. And then kind of relegated to the side in Last Jedi and especially in Rise of the Skywalker. I had a whole argument about this where I said I think it's because they brought R2-D2 back, and once you had 2 robots who couldn't speak and you had Chewbacca who doesn't speak English, you can only do so much for those characters until you just have a lot of scenes happening with one character not speaking in a language that the audience understands. So that, makes it hard. We also have all of the Transformers in The Last Knight and Age of Extinction, specifically because Chloe feels that the Dinobots got disrespected. I tried watching Age of Extinction and couldn't finish it. It's also very long. Finally, we have the Pacific Rim robots because, to quote Chloe, they are not sentient. If they can't give her consent, she doesn't care about them. That sounded worse than I meant. Moving on. Finally, we have the funniest dumb shit. Chloe has named 4. We have Press X to Sean, which is a glitch from Heavy Rain. We have news anchors losing it after interviewing Ryan Lochte. We have all of r/prequel memes, making the prequels relevant to this entire generation. Shout out to that. That might be the most power Reddit has ever had. That's not true. Reddit has a lot of power. But no, I don't know where this is going. Our prequel memes has a lot of power. It fundamentally shifted our perspective on the prequels. Shout out to them. And finally, the Sonic 06 dub. I don't know what that is, but Chloe sent me a text after our first conversation with it, and I've yet to watch the video that she texted to me. So I'll find that out eventually. And it's probably cursed. If you want to find it out, search Sonic 06 dub. And you can also find out if it's cursed. I am going to find the video so that I can... It's called Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 Real-Time Fan Dub Games. Look it up. Have a good and or bad time. Guys, those are all of the nominations for the Chloscars, the Chloscar Awards. I'd also like to throw in a dumb shit funny nomination for just John Mulaney as a whole, specifically John Mulaney and the Sack Lunch Bunch, but really John Mulaney as a whole. I watched an interview with John Mulaney and Stephen Colbert a couple days ago. It was wild. It started off normal, and then at one point, John Mulaney started talking about anxiety, and Stephen Colbert was like, "Do you have a lot of anxiety?" And John Mulaney was like, "Yeah, I have tons of anxiety." And Stephen Colbert was like, "Do you think your anxiety is why you don't let anyone truly know you?" And then John Mulaney just freezes. He freezes, and he considers this for a second, and he goes, "Oh boy," and it's great. And they had this really interesting, honest conversation about anxiety and letting people in. It's wild. The internet's good sometimes, guys. I guess it's a TV show technically, but I watched it on YouTube, so fuck it. Anyway, this has been kind of that Wannabe film class. Thank you for joining me and me alone if you've gotten this far in the episode. The Oscars are a time. I'm really interested to see what nominations actually win going into the actual awards. I think it'll be really interesting. Logan would like to say that A, Parasite's amazing and deserves everything, and B, he's really a big fan of the Oscars. I have more conflicted feelings about them, but they're still fun. It's still fun to watch the award show. For me, as a film major, it's fun to gather with friends and sit around and watch. One time, my friend was one of the intern guys giving out the awards on stage. He shook Frances McDormand's hand, and that's dope. So, the Oscars, they're a complicated time that have a bit too much of a preferential treatment towards the movies and ideas of the past. But at the end of the day, they're just awards, and it's cool to see film being honored. And it's also cool, Logan mentioned this, it's cool in Logan's mind that the Oscars play all of the awards. They don't, do cutaways to other things. They don't give away awards during commercials. They don't give away awards away from the main show. Every award that is given out, you get to see the people come up and talk about it. So it's cool that they do have that kind of respect for really emphasizing everyone who gets an award. Guys, this has been that Wannabe film class. I said that already, but I'm saying it again. If you liked what you heard, which would be an interesting episode to choose that on, but sure, you can rate us, subscribe to us, and review us on iTunes. You can also subscribe to us on Spotify. I would really appreciate it if you gave us a review. We've gotten a couple of ratings. They're high marks, so we really appreciate that. But, getting those reviews in don't help. You can find me at Mr_BentoBox on Twitter, at Mr. BentoBox everywhere else. That mostly is Letterboxd and Instagram. You can find Chloe at EchoClo across the board. She has a Letterboxd. She has an Instagram. She has a Twitter. I don't know why Twitter was the one that I had trouble thinking of, but she has it. And you can find Logan at Log at Lefty Loggy, Lefty Logggy on Twitter, probably on other things too. Don't know for sure. Could have looked that up. Didn't. Here we are. You can also support That Nerdy Site on patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Throw us a few bucks if you have it. We would appreciate all the support. And you can find all of the other things that we do on thatnerdysite.com. Like I said, I wrote an article about Superman and Brandon Routh and the DCEU because I really like the DCEU. And I think that they should put Brandon Routh's Superman into it. And if you want to see my entire argument about why, check it out. Thank you so much for listening to this very weird, messy, lost episode cover-up of That Wannabe Film Class. We will be back to our regularly scheduled podcasting next week with Crazy Rich Asians for Rom-Com Month. Bye.